Welcome. I'm Dr. Ralph Kilman. Thank you for enrolling in my online course, Group Training in Conflict Management. I'm so happy to have you here. As the guidelines on our website suggest, before you proceed with this group course, it's best if you've already taken either our online course on basic training in conflict management or our course on advanced training in conflict management. I assure you, to get the most from this group training course, it's essential that you first learn how to accurately interpret individual TKI results before you attempt to interpret the much more complicated group TKI results. As we'll see during this course, I define a group as two or more people who are interconnected through a shared goal, purpose, responsibility, or fate, who engage in face-to-face or online interaction. However, most of the examples in this course are for groups in organizations, such as work units, cross-functional teams, committees, project teams, joint venture teams, or virtual teams. But my broad definition of a group also includes families, couples, or even two business partners who are interested in improving their conflict handling behavior. So please keep in mind that my notion of a group can apply to any coordinated arrangement of two or more people, ranging from a couple in a relationship to a department in an organization. There are essentially two perspectives by which you can take this course. First, you might be taking this course as a facilitator, as a consultant, trainer, coach, or mediator who wishes to learn this material so you can effectively apply it to your client groups or client organizations. Second, you might be taking this course along with the other members in your group in order to improve your own as well as your entire team's conflict handling behavior. Regardless of whether you're taking this course as a facilitator who helps others or as group members who are helping themselves, I recommend that you take the TKI assessment twice so you can learn the most from this course, especially when we develop and then interpret group TKI profiles. As you'll soon discover, when you take two TKIs, you do so with modified instructions. The first TKI assessment is for how you respond to conflict inside your group, while your second TKI assessment is for how you deal with conflict outside your group in all other settings in your life. Examining the contrasting results from these two TKI assessments is exactly what allows us to decipher the impact of the group's unique attributes for conflict handling behavior for better or worse, such as the impact of the group leader, the cultural norms in the group, and the organization's reward system. On the next page, I show the outline. Let me briefly walk you through it so you know what to expect. First, I will cover seeing the big picture, also known as the complex hologram, which I include in each one of our online courses. In this case, we're particularly focused on the complex hologram as depicting the situation that surrounds the group, whether the group is a work group, a family, a small business, it matters not. What is the situation which determines which conflict modes are more likely to be effective? In this discussion of seeing the big picture, we'll also talk briefly about the 8 tracks to bring about a change in that situation so that all 5 conflict modes can be used as needed. We will also consider the role of diagnosis, in this case, diagnosing the group to see how well it's making use of conflict handling modes and resolving its conflicts. This diagnosis will play a role later when we need to assess in what ways the group needs to improve how it manages conflict. Then we'll spend a little time on the TKI. First, I will summarize the underlying dimensions of assertiveness and cooperativeness and spend a little time on the 5 modes, but it will be brief because I'm assuming that you've covered this material in depth in either our basic training or advanced training course. And then we will consider what are some of the attributes of the situation that determine whether one mode is more effective than another. There, in fact, will be 8 key attributes to consider, and then we'll spend a little time looking at when to use a mode and how to use a mode in order for it to be effective. Then we'll switch to conflict management in groups. And here we need to spend some time again on defining a group. I did a little bit of that in my orientation. And also how a group is different than the sum of the individuals. There's been a tendency, understandably, to simply take the average of the individual TKI results and assume that that explains group conflict handling behavior. But groups are more than the sum of their members, and we have to take that into account. In this section, we're also going to consider what it means to modify the standard instructions on the TKI assessment, and what are we actually assessing when we modify those instructions. In this section, we'll also consider the impact of the leader or co-leaders on the group's choice of conflict handling modes, which is one important feature of what makes a group more than the sum of its individuals. In the next section, developing group TKI profiles is when we bring together the information and tally the results of how people responded to the TKI twice for both inside and outside the group. And this will allow us to develop those group TKI profiles, which I mentioned are far more complicated than a single individual TKI profile. In fact, we'll be looking at the high scores and the low scores, both inside and outside the group, which creates a four-fold diagram of conflict handling modes. And once we've developed these four-fold group TKI profiles, we'll be able to see the important distinction between what is called situational similarities and situational differences that cut across people's conflict handling choices within their group and in other life settings. And this will be seen as the primary reason that we had you take the TKI twice, so we can make that distinction. It's a powerful part of all the recommendations that can be made for improving conflict handling behavior in a group. With regards to interpreting group profiles, I will show you 3 different examples, and I will interpret each one, making use of this important distinction between similarities and differences in terms of the group's situation. And that will suggest what is going on in the group that is effective or ineffective, which will lead us eventually to suggest how the group can in fact improve its conflict handling behavior. In the next section, we'll talk about the most troublesome patterns in conflict management, and these are the patterns I've seen again and again in old, large, bureaucratic organizations, and you'd be surprised how often the pattern appears. And once we recognize it, we then have to see how we can address it. And this will certainly make use of the 8 tracks and the big picture, because there's many things in the situation besides the people's own preferences for conflict handling behavior, which are causing those troublesome patterns in an organization. Then we'll move on to how do we improve conflict management based on the group TKI profile and how we've been able to interpret it. And I'll develop for you what is called the conflict management matrix, which organizes 4 very different action recommendations depending on what's going on inside the group, outside the group, and whether or not conflict handling behavior was diagnosed as being effective or ineffective. And this will lead to some very synergistic kinds of recommendations to help any group improve its conflict handling behavior. And then we will wrap up the course with congratulations.